All right. Hello. Welcome. This is Mr. Huff. We're going to talk about lesson 2.8 today, specifically the Articles of Confederation. All right. So I want you to think about what was going on uh, in what would become the United States in the late 1770s. Uh, the colonies had just declared independence from England. They were in the middle of a war. And as this war is going on, they're having to form a government. For hundreds of years, these colonies have been just that. They've been colonies of England. They had been living essentially under British rule for all of that time, and now they're faced with the challenge of, well, how do we create a government for ourselves? And what we're going to find out in today's lesson is that when they create that government, whenever they create that first government of the United States of America, it had some problems. We're going to talk about that. In fact, the government that they created there during the Revolutionary War is not the government that we have today in the United States. And we're going to talk about why that is. That first government that they created was called the Articles of Confederation. All right, and the Articles of Confederation lasted as the government of the United States of America for about 10 years. And then eventually that's going to be replaced by the government we have today, which is the Constitution. All right. Um, the first thing to know about the Articles of Confederation, probably the most important thing to know, is that the Articles of Confederation created a government where the central government was very, very weak. Now, the central government, sometimes we call the federal government, but the central government is the government that today is located in Washington, D.C., the federal government, the big government. In the Articles of Confederation, that government was really, really weak. There are a lot of things that that government could not do. Well, if that government was really weak, who had all of the power in the Articles of Confederation? Well, that would be the state governments. All right. And we talk a little bit about why it was set up that way. But each state was essentially an independent country, more or less. Each state had its own constitution. Each state had its own army. Each state printed its own money. So think about that. If there was a different form of currency in South Carolina versus the form of currency in Georgia versus in North Carolina, you can imagine that would lead to some problems. And we're going to see down the line here that is going to lead to some problems. But all of that was specifically designed so that the central government was weak, right? And then, of course, that's going to cause some problems down the line that we'll have to solve. All right. Sorry, guys, I'm having some difficulty. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Well, so the government, like I said, that is created as this Articles of Confederation is incredibly weak at the federal level, or at the central level. Okay. So let's talk about some ways that it was really, really weak. For example, at the federal level, at the central government level, they could create an army. The central government could create an army, but it didn't have the money to create the army, right? To have the money to, buy the supplies and pay the troops, all that sort of thing. All of the money that the federal government had under the Articles of Confederation came from the states, because the central government under the Articles of Confederation didn't have the power to tax. The only thing that it could do is ask individual states to contribute, ask essentially for donations from each state. The states could tax its citizens, but the federal government didn't have the ability to tax. And because of that, it was very difficult to raise an army. It was very difficult to do all kinds of things that the government would be doing. So the government, under the Articles of Confederation, actually didn't do that much. The government had the ability to handle issues of diplomacy, signing treaties with foreign governments, sending ambassadors to other countries, that sort of thing. It had the power to create a post office. All of these are powers of the central government under the Articles of Confederation. But it didn't have a central executive. It didn't have essentially a president, as we would call it today. It could create, and it did create, a legislative body, a Congress. All right. But in that Congress, each state only had one vote. It's a little different than how things are run under the Constitution. We call that, or it was a unicameral legislature, meaning that there was only one house. Under the Constitution, today we have a bicameral legislature. We have two houses. We call it the Senate and the House of Representatives. All right. But all of that in the Articles of Confederation did not exist, because the Articles of Confederation specifically was designed to create a weak central government. Why is that? Well, they had just come out of this horrible, from their perspective, relationship with England. They felt that England was tyrannical. They felt that the central government of England was tyrannical on them, and they didn't want to create a system where a new king could rise to power. So they specifically created a system where it was really, really weak. All right. But that's going to lead to some problems. Remember me talking about how, for example, each state had its own form of money. Each state controlled its own economy. And because of that, there were a lot of economic problems in America during the Articles of Confederation. And one of those really bad economic situations existed in Massachusetts. Farmers in Massachusetts, for example, because of the economy, because of the way it was, were having their farms foreclosed by banks. Courts were coming in and taking the farms, giving them to the banks that had loaned them money. It was a really bad situation, and a group of farmers in Massachusetts decided they had enough, so they rose up and they actually rebelled against the government of Massachusetts. They marched into the towns and tried to take over the courts, and all of this led to some really violent, bloody protests, and the federal government was unable to handle it. All right, it was actually the state of Massachusetts that actually was able to put down this essentially attempt at a civil war. While all that happened, it really led people to think, wow, maybe the government under the Articles of Confederation just wasn't strong enough. All right. And so what a lot of people started talking about after that rebellion, which we call Shays Rebellion, because like I said, the man who started it was a farmer named Daniel Shays. After Shays Rebellion, people started saying, well, maybe we should strengthen the Articles of Confederation. Maybe we should give more power to the central government. And ultimately, that's going to lead to a change to get rid of the Articles of Confederation and bring in a constitution. Okay, so I'm going to let you go ahead and read this activity on 8.4. And on 8.5, there's a video you can watch here. And again, this kind of goes over these same ideas, but I'm going to skip right ahead here to the quick check. Okay, so what was a weakness of the Articles of Confederation? Remember, I said the Articles of Confederation, the central government was really, really weak. So let's look at these options. Congress did not have the power to create a military. Congress did not have the power to tax the states. States had no way to settle disputes between other states. States had to relinquish their sovereignty. Okay, so what is it? Well, which was a weakness? Well, the big issue was that Congress didn't have the power to tax the states. Okay, what entity was given power by the Articles of Confederation? Okay, the president. Okay, also known as the chief executive. Remember, I said in the Articles of Confederation there was no chief executive. Okay, so it's not that. Bicameral legislature. We did talk about legislature, but remember, bicameral is what we have today in the United States. It's a two-house legislature. We'll talk a lot about that in the next unit. But then there was not a bicameral legislature. It was only one house. So we call that a unicameral legislature. Okay. So the unicameral legislature is the part of the Articles of Confederation government that had power, but even that was pretty weak. All right. Why did the founding fathers think it necessary to create the Articles of Confederation? Okay. Were they trying to establish a monarchy to replace the British king? No, they weren't. Did they want to establish 13 different governments with no central government? You might look at that and say, yeah, that's it. But remember, it says no central government. They just wanted a weaker central government. Okay. To make peace with the British Empire, or to establish a legal basis for the permanent government of the United States. And there's your answer. All right. right, and there we go. All right, guys. If you have any questions, certainly reach out to us. But otherwise, hope this will be helpful to you. Um, it's really important, guys. These videos, we're going to walk you through some of the concepts, give you kind of an overview. But don't forget, you're responsible to go back and do that reading. So don't forget to do that reading in each of these modules. Read through it and think about what it's saying here. Okay. But otherwise, I hope you have a great day. Thanks a lot.